Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, why did crime increase last year? Should 2024 be a year of optimism in America? And only 302 days before the November presidential elections. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former County Council member and CEO of SkillSmart, Mike Knapp, and Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Welcome back and Happy New Year. There were spikes in crime in Montgomery County in 2023, including auto thefts, carjackings, homicide, robberies, and burglaries. I mean, that sort of runs the gamut of crime, doesn't it? Mike, is our staffing of policy, or is it policies that are contributing to the increase in crime last year? I mean, we've talked about this several times during the year. I mean, where are we headed with this thing?
I don't think we're headed in a good direction, and I don't think it's staffing or policy. I don't think it's binary. I think it's yes. I don't think that our police. I think one of the reasons you're seeing a challenge in staffing is I think that police in Montgomery County don't feel as though supported by the folks who are leading the community, and I think there's good reason for them to believe that. I've yet to hear the county executive actually speak out on why he thinks our police are important and the role that they play. And so I think that's a real challenge. That being said, hiring we've seen is a challenge across the country. And so it's not unique to Montgomery County, but we are suffering from the challenge that they have and a lack of leadership at a policy level and the hiring challenges that others are seeing. And we also have a retirement system that is presenting an opportunity for a lot of people to take early retirement, and they're taking advantage of that. And so our numbers are down dramatically, and our numbers are likely to drop even further over the course of the next 6 to 9 months. And we can end up with a police force that we have probably 20% below our full complement of police officers. 20-25% is a very real scenario for us, which is a challenge.
Well, Mark, the police commissioner already says that there's a 15% vacancy rate in the policing rank, and and he attributed it to excessive laws and regulation designed to address police misconduct, no matter how well intended, are having an opposite effect on morale and on hiring. But how can you have a stable society without an adequate police force?
Well, as Mike mentioned, this is the phenomena of the vacancies. It's one that exists across the country. Lots of police forces are struggling with it, and it's disconcerting because it also, for those who want to change the way criminal justice is administered, it's also an opportunity to encourage people who might otherwise not have thought about being police officers to join the force and to see what it takes, to see what the challenges are, but if there's potential to re-envision the way policing should be done, it's an opportunity for those people to step up and do it. I think people don't fully appreciate how challenging the job is, and that's perhaps one of the things that is something of a fault line between those who are want to see the police operate in a different way and what police see as their job.
Well, I want to get back to the policy issues, and there's it's not just the number of police that we have, but there seems to be a more brazenness about people committing crimes. I mean, certainly the uptick in car thefts. People take the opportunity to go into cars and break into cars. The carjacking. I mean, carjacking is an crime of opportunity that people are taking more and more advantage of. So, is the brazenness of those that are committing crimes because the police are being handicapped, or they just know they're going to get away with things? Mike, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Mark.
I think it's a confluence of a lot of events. I went back and looked at crime statistics yesterday in preparation for this, and so if you look from year over year, crime collectively has declined, not nationally. In Montgomery County, we're actually not seeing the same level of decline as you're seeing other places, you pointed out at the beginning of the show, which I think is very troubling. But that's year over year. If you go back to 2019 versus 2022, crime in 2022, even though it was down from 2021, is still well above where it was going into 2018 and 2019. And so I think that during the pandemic, people had time, there were challenges, there were a lot of things that were coming together. And I think, to your point, there was opportunity, and I think people saw they get away with it. And I think others saw that. And so I think that is working into this. At the same time, you've got fewer police officers to be able to respond. And I think you're seeing all of these things coming together at the same time and creating an unperfect storm, if you will, or an imperfect storm. And I think that's what we're trying to deal with. At the same time, the policies that people are trying to address or trying to put in place are policies of being against. I don't like what police did. They shouldn't do this. What are they? What do we want police to be in our communities? How do they grow? How do we want them to be proactive and engage things? And I haven't seen policymakers saying what that looks like. And I think police need to know, great, you don't want me to do this? Tell me what you want me to do, and we'll go do it. But we've got to have a plan. And in the absence of that, we're all kind of sitting ducks.
Yeah. So, Mark, this isn't, as Mike pointed out, this is a crime phenomenon is not, isolated to Montgomery County. The District of Columbia and Prince George's County are also experiencing these same things. So, is there a lack of leadership that is contributing to this problem?
I think certainly yes. I think one of the things that we've touched on, but I think bears elaborating on, is police officers develop an instinct, a kind of sixth sense of something's wrong, and they may make a misjudgment, but they kind of can sense things, and if they're right most of the time, or a certain percentage of the time, that can be effective policing. And that phenomena of officers kind of gauging and being situationally aware is something we increasingly as a society, or at least the political leaders, have a question, and they have looked for, tell us what the objective reason was you were looking to do something. And there's a disconnect there that has discouraged police officers from using those sixth sense, if you will. And I'm not quite sure how to resolve that, because it really is kind of the fault line between those who see the police doing something else and what police officers have traditionally been doing.
Yeah, back when I was a young attorney and I had hair, I served as a special assistant U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia for a while. And one of the things I had to do was sit on a citizens complaint panel. And there are, legitimate complaints, coming from the public. Mm-hmm. But also it also emphasized the difficulty, to me anyway, it emphasized the difficulty of good policing and not overstepping the boundaries. Anyway, this is a topic that's going to go on for a while, because I think we have a lack of leadership in the county executive's office on this issue, and I think something needs to be done. Let's go on to our second topic. And, for a curmudgeon like me, this is really an unusual topic to want to talk about, which is optimism in the marketplace and in society for 2024. My unscientific poll of clients and friends indicate that, 2023 was a tough year financially for many of them in business. I mean, they got by, but it was not a great year. They worked harder and they made less money. So I'm in the real estate business, and all you have to do is look at the applications for mortgages and new home sales and home sales. It's down. And my associates there report that it was an off year last year. They blamed it on the lack of inventory. They blamed it on higher interest rates, but they don't have any idea when it's going to stop. So, Mike, now that the Fed has sort of, said they aren't going to jerk us around on higher interest rates anytime soon, should we take that as a sign of confidence and prosperity will return in 2024?
As another small business owner and owner of a technology firm, I'll agree, it was a challenging year. And I think a lot of technology firms, as we saw across the country, recalibrating. And I think it was difficult as people kind of came out of the pandemic, a market that did certain things, uncharacteristically, now all of a sudden had to get back to what a traditional market looked like. Plus you had interest rates and a variety of other things coming together. And I think that created real challenges. I'll say that I started, and have seen this in other sectors as well, we hit about October, November of this past year, and I started to see things moving more positively, and moving in the right direction, just from a business perspective. From a personal perspective, and just, we had opportunity over the holidays to engage with lots of different folks over lots of different periods, and clearly spending was fine. People were engaging, and we're spending money, and we look at that collectively across the country, and so that's usually a good indicator. I think if you look at surveys and polls, where we tend to be still so bifurcated in our country that depending upon who's asking the question, and we want to make sure that we know who's giving the answer, so we want to make sure somebody looks bad. But I think if you look at more objective measures, yeah, people are feeling more confident than they were.
Did you go to the grocery store, Mike? Come on.
I did.
I mean, if you go to the grocery store, that grocery store bill had to be 20% higher than it was the year before.
But we knew that. I mean, that wasn't news. I mean, I've had to eat the entire time. It's actually growing less than it was before. So yeah, it's more, but it's less than it was.
All right. So Mark, Larry Kudlow points out that since Joe Biden took office, the average middle-class American family has lost 20% of its purchasing power. So is there a reason for optimism in 2024?
Could I say, I think it's political malpractice of the highest order to kind of engage in denialism of looking at the data of saying, gee, everything's rosy, when in fact the public doesn't think it is. And to be sure, we had for lack of a better word, Keynesian blowout of spending that drove demand, that drove unemployment down, that drove the economy, some indicators in a very positive direction. But as you described, Casey, it also resulted in increased inflation, and that's something that has really hit people in their pocketbook in a negative way, since their income hasn't gone up as much as the cost of living. And again, coming back to the theme of the political malpractice, I remember Bill Clinton, and I feel your pain. And this is an administration that is in denial of the fact that they want to look at their indicators and not reflect on the wallet or pocketbook issues that a lot of Americans judge the economy by.
Well, I think Americans have a short memory because they're optimistic by nature. And so I think, going into 2024, they're looking for optimism. Again, I mentioned earlier that the Fed has decided that they're not going to adjust interest rates upward anytime soon, and that's a statement for optimism. And as Mike said in his comments, people buckle down. I mean, Americans are hardworking, and they buckle down, and they just are going to get to it, I think, and that's going to play into the general theme of 2024, and as we go into the election cycle. So it's going to be interesting to watch, especially the job numbers.
I think one of the interesting points, though, and I think I agree with you, Mark, in that I think that we've got to look at the reality. And I think the challenge that we have is that we have such wide disparity right now in our economy. And so on the one hand, interest rates are down, inflation is down, job numbers are good, GDP is good, and the stock market is amazing. And set at the same time, you look at 10% of the top 8 wage earners in the country have 66% of the wealth, 50% of the wage earners have 2% of the wealth. And so when you look at that, I think there's a real disconnect as to who's seeing what and how that's being communicated and what people are seeing. Because I think there's just such a wide gap that I think is really difficult for us as a collective to navigate through that and understand how do we address that, because it's really big.
Mark, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I agree with that. I think that it's a good point to make. I think that the ultra low interest rates had the effect of dramatically increasing those people who had assets were in a privileged position, whereas those people who didn't weren't.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thank you so much. We got to go to our short break, and guess what? Only 302 days before the November presidential elections. So the question is, can Biden defeat Trump again? Will Democrats hold on to the Senate? Can Democrats retake the House? Stay tuned. We'll give the answers when we come back from this short break. Welcome back, and guess what? only 10 days before the Iowa Republican caucus and just 302 days before the next presidential election. Mark, since there's no one challenging President Biden, we've got to presume that he'll be the Democratic nominee. What can we expect from your party in the next 10 days?
Well, I'm always struck when we reach this particular point of, coming into the primary and caucus season, how everything speeds up and events have a way of things that were kind of more glacial in the year before the election end up happening very quickly. And, 1 week's primary kind of changes the trajectory in dramatic ways. I think it remains to see. You mentioned Republicans, and I think one of the things that is not as well appreciated is they're a very strong base, maybe 40, maybe 45, maybe 50 for Trump, but there's also a strong base of, for lack of a better word, in Maryland, say Hogan Republicans and more traditional Republicans. I think they're kind of dug in, and I think as a result, the tendency for primaries to resolve themselves and everybody say, okay, now we have a nominee. There may be a more protracted battle than many people are anticipating right now.
Mark, that might be true, but look at a guy like Tom Emmers of Minnesota, who just came out and endorsed Trump after Trump tried to defeat him in the last election. I mean, I'm disappointed, frankly. Elaine Stefanik, came out and said she was going to remove the, endorsement for a Ohio congressman because he criticized Donald Trump as being unpresidential in his behavior. I mean, this is nuts.
I don't, Casey, the answer I think is I don't think that the office holders are the best indicator of that, particularly those office holders that have primaries that they're more worried about than general elections. And so there's a little of self-preservation that's going on some of those choices.
No. All right. Well, so Mark, what's going on Mike, what's going on in your party? There doesn't seem to be anybody, who's, this is unusual, right? I mean, I've never in my life seen a Democratic election where there was nobody running. I mean, and maybe it goes back to Carter, when Carter was running for a re-election and Ted Kennedy challenged him, and they blamed Kennedy for Jimmy Carter's loss. I mean, what's going on in your party?
I think that's a real scenario. I think that Biden beat Trump. I think polling numbers I recognize today don't show that, but we've all seen over the last 8 years, the polling numbers are going a whole lot of different directions than we once thought they did. And I think that Mark is right, that you've got a lot of people that are dug in a lot of different directions, that until we kind of get to a point that says, here's who we have on the playlist, that I'm not just necessarily sure you're going to be able to say what side people are really on. And so I think that, I think people are coalescing behind the president. And I think that, I don't know, I'm sure that makes sense. I think both of these candidates are too old for where we are. And I think we need to have something that looks different as if we're going to lead our country in a different direction. That being said, we are down the road that we're down. And I think that in order to ensure that Trump doesn't win again, the conventional wisdom is saying that you get behind Biden. That being said, I think there are a lot of issues out there that are still going to come in and have a significant impact over the course of the next 10 months. And I think that Mark is right. Things move quickly. And I think there's a lot of potential things there's a lot of shoes that are going to drop that could have a significant impact, that it's just going to be really hard to sit here today and anticipate which one of those is going to be the thing that created the chaos that we're going to be facing.
Well, I mean, what's fascinating is that, and we all see this. I mean, every time that there's an indictment or some kind of decision that's unfavorable to Donald Trump, seems to get stronger. Mark, today is Friday, and President Biden has pushed up his speech at Valley Forge, where he will again attack the MAGA Republicans as being the danger to democracy. Is that the right strategy, do you think, for the Democrats to take?
Well, I'm probably the wrong person.
I'm going to ask both of you this question.
I always hate it when Democrats give us, quote, good advice. But listen, it probably makes sense for him to do that. I think we'd expect to it. I do think Democrats have tended to think it's a little like paying Jenga. That this expectation for the last 8 years now that if you just pull one more block out in this edifice, that Trump will come tumbling down. And I think it ignores the fact that much of the bad news, negative information, that's all baked in. People know it, and many of the people who support him simply are at this point they're basically expect the institutions that are assembled against the former president to do what they're doing, and it doesn't really have the consequence that
Well,
advocates for President Biden
Mark,
say.
you're absolutely right. There's some columnists and prognosticators that are calling this speech by Biden today an endorsement of President Trump, because every time Biden attacks Trump, Trump seems to get stronger in the Republican Party. Mike, what do you think is the right strategy here?
Oh, what is the right strategy? I mean, I think you have to make that attack, because I think you've got to make sure that those lines are drawn. I think at the end of the day, though, what changes, what's going to ultimately get people out to vote is not necessarily going to be the personality of those two people, because I think those lines are already drawn. I think it's going to be all of the policies and the issues that people are seeing that are impacting their lives at the time of the election. And so what do you think about abortion? What do you think about where the economy is? What do you think about those elements are going to be what's going to drive this? Because we already know the cult of personality that is Trump. We know who the other person's going to be who is currently the president. And we look at those pieces and we've already drawn those lines. And so now everybody kind of who lives in that rational middle, what's going to drive us and what's going to be the decision-making process we take based on the policies and the issues?
Well, since we seem to operate in the rational middle, at least I like to think so, I recommend everybody read George Will's column from yesterday.
Yeah, I saw that.
About the threat to democracy and so on. Anyway, we got to take our short break. When we come back, we'll come back with parting shots. Now with parting shots, Mark Uncapher.
Well, I like to, on a positive note, do a sort of a hat tip to the Washington Wizards that have been partnering with the Montgomery County Public Library on a program to encourage reading on the part of students, basically, I think from about age 3 to 19. So it includes really the whole student population. This is a really great opportunity, and it's a great reminder that the kind of improvement of education and the maintenance of education in Montgomery County is something we all need to be responsible. It's not just parents, it's not just students, it's not just the schools themselves, but it's something as a community we can all work towards. So hats off to the Wizards and to the Montgomery County Public Library.
Thank you, Mark. Mike Knapp, your parting shot.
Well, we've entered January, which enters the time of year where local and state government actually does the things that most people actually see and pay attention to. And so I just would encourage people as it's beginning to pay attention, understand what's happening at your local government, what's happening at the state level. State legislature comes back into session next week. And just if there's an issue that you're concerned about, make sure that you are taking advantage of the fact that you have 3 delegates and a senator that you can go down and talk to, and do that. If there are issues that you're concerned about and that actually end up moving forward in the legislature or locally at the council level, take advantage of making sure that you go out and be able to make your voice heard in those opportunities. But this is the time to do it. These are the things that you can see. These are things that are going to impact us the rest of the year. And so they're there for you, and take advantage of that.
Absolutely. A well-informed citizenry is the core of our democracy. I want to thank you both for being here today, and I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.